After a highly publicized 10-month battle, the decision has been made. Ottawa selects Germany's TKMS as preferred bidder for Canada's mega-billion-dollar patrol submarine project. Now, negotiations can begin to deliver up to 12 next-generation submarines for the Royal Canadian Navy, with the two bidders having met Canada's core operational and technological requirements. What convinced Ottawa to choose Germany's Type 212 CD over South Korea's KSS-3? Also, does South Korea still get something out of this race? First of all, here's a quick timeline about the Canadian Patrol Submarine Project or CPSP. The CPSP will deliver up to 12 next-gen submarines to replace the aging Victoria class, which will remain operational into the mid to late 2030s. Ottawa has conducted a rigorous multi-stage procurement process to identify a preferred supplier, including a request for information issued from late 2024 to early 2025, identifying two qualified suppliers, Hanwha and TKMS, in August, issuing proposal instructions in November, and submission of proposals in March 2026. From a purely technical standpoint, both contenders presented compelling yet radically different solutions for the project. The South Korean KSS-3 is a massive, long-range blue water strike platform, packing a heavy punch with its vertical launch systems. The German Type 212 CD, by contrast, is a specialized, ultra-stealthy hunter-killer, meticulously optimized for the unique demands of the Arctic. Both are world-class platforms that deserve this contract. So why did Ottawa ultimately choose German stealth over South Korean firepower? If enthusiasm is the deciding factor, Hanwha and South Korea would win with gusto. Unlike TKMS, which looked dour and hesitant at the early stage of the race, the South Koreans have been signing partnerships, engaging in the publicity blitz, and generally showing themselves to be really pumped about CPSP. Their public relations campaign has been so strong that they have left the impression that CPSP is theirs to lose, and they have good reasons. Seoul is aggressively positioning itself as a primary arsenal for NATO. They have already locked down massive land and air contracts across Europe, but they haven't cracked NATO's naval sector. That's exactly why securing Canada's submarine program would be a historic breakthrough for Seoul. Although South Korea has been building submarines for decades, in terms of exports, Seoul has only ever managed to sell submarines to one nation, Indonesia. And to put it mildly, that campaign left a bitter aftertaste for both sides. Stalled payments, performance disputes, and a frozen second batch contract effectively halted South Korea's momentum. If a NATO member like Canada trusts South Korea with its underwater deterrent, it would erase any remaining doubt for the rest of the alliance and also the world. The problem, however, is that Canada and Hanwha don't have a long history. If Ottawa chose South Korea, Canada will be jumping into a brand new bilateral relationship with no safety net. Neither side is accustomed to doing business with the other. In a project of this scale, that total lack of shared history is a recipe for operational friction, cultural misunderstandings, and unpredictable budget strains. Ottawa knows these stakes all too well, so it's understandable for them to be hesitant to reward a market newcomer like South Korea with a contract to handle Canada's largest naval project in a generation. The case is different with Germany. What the Germans have going for them is familiarity, their standing as a good ally, and the fact that they are a known quantity. Of course, dealing with them will come with challenges, but you will ultimately get a dependable capability and a submarine that will be operated by two other NATO navies, the Germans and Norwegians. This may explain TKMS altitude. Their approach is boring reliability. That in itself cannot be underestimated in defense procurement. TKMS refused to engage in the publicity blitz that Hanwha undertook from the outset of the race. As the Germans often repeated, they weren't going to participate in a procurement popularity contest. They were also slower to set up a presence in Ottawa and were selective about the agreements and partnerships they signed with Canadian firms. They believed that their submarines, their record, and their more guarded attitude would carry the day. And looking at the result, it seems they were right. From the start, when discussing the CPSP, TKMS and German officials consistently emphasized two core points. First, they highlighted a massive decades-long record of exporting submarines and in many cases building them entirely on foreign soil. For TKMS, international sales are business as usual. So, while the Canadian project is both lucrative and strategically vital, it's also standard practice for them. Second, the German pitch focuses entirely on alliance frameworks. The Type 212 CD is already a joint venture between two key NATO members. Adding Canada to the mix creates an instant trilateral ecosystem where all three nations can pool resources and leverage familiar operational networks. In other words, a Germany, Norway, Canada submarine family transforms an isolated procurement into a massive 24-boat alliance, streamlining shared logistics, training, and collective defense under the NATO umbrella. TKMS indeed looked less enthusiastic at the early stage of the race. In recent weeks, though, it emerged that the German bid promised more investment in the Canadian economy. Despite being more conservative and muted, TKMS has been successfully wheeling and dealing. Once the evaluation scores are published, we will have a better sense of what cleans it for them. But my guess is technical requirements and economic benefits. The political backdrop matters too. Under a Eurocentric prime minister like Mark Carney, Ottawa was always going to feel more comfortable dealing with a traditional continental ally, giving Germany the ultimate home field advantage. I'm sure South Korea will be more than disappointed. They gave it their all politically, diplomatically, and economically. But it doesn't mean that Hanwha gained nothing from this project. This close run race with Germany has handed Seoul a different prize. Proof that it can challenge one of the world's traditional undersea warfare powers on a stage watched closely by defense buyers. Experts said South Korea's performance had reinforced its growing reputation as a serious contender in the global submarine market, with the close race suggesting its bid was competitive, even as broader geopolitical considerations appear to favor Germany. The outcome, though disappointing, should not be viewed as a major setback for South Korea's long-term maritime defense export ambitions, because opportunities will eventually open up for South Korea as it continues knocking on the door. The future of South Korea's defense relationship with Canada might get slower after this, but it is far from the end of the road for Ottawa and Seoul, with Canada accelerating plans to buy hundreds of new track armored vehicles and eventually overhaul its entire tank fleet. South Korea's land catalog is a perfect match. Their tanks, IFVs, and artillery are already tearing up NATO's training grounds in Europe. If South Korea loses the battle for Canada's ocean, they are fully loaded and ready to fight for its land. And I must remind you that if negotiation with TKMS failed, Canada reserved the right to go to reserve supplier Hanwha and begin negotiations with them. Now, what's next? Selecting a preferred submarine bidder was the easy part. Negotiating the contract and getting the boats built and delivered, setting up infrastructure and training regimes, and preparing the Navy to take on up to 12 submarines will be the much bigger challenge. What do you think of Canada's decision to select TKMS as the preferred bidder for its submarine program? Do you think it's well-deserved? Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you for watching everyone. I'll see you in the next one.